against. Bop me down upon my knees. Oh, I beg and plead, singing, come out of things unsaid. Shoot an apple off my head, and trouble that can't be named. Tigers waiting to be tamed, singing, you, oh, you, confusion that never stops, closing walls and ticking clocks. Gonna come back and take you home. I could not stop, that you now know, singing, come out upon my seas. Cursed missed opportunities. Am I a part of the cure, or am I part of the disease?
Great job, Dom, band. Didn't they do a great job? Pastor Dom, so before the service, Graham was like, do you see Dom on the piano? He's using both hands. I'm like, what, do you normally do this? Yeah, jingle bells, jingle bells. Anyway, good morning, guys. My name is Eric. If you don't know, maybe you're new here. Maybe last week was your first week, and Pastor Graham spoke last week, so I'm going to be bringing the talk for the next couple of weeks. And as Molly said, we're in week 2 of the series called Living on the Edge. And if you missed Graham's message last week, so good, so good, so good. Get on our YouTube channel. You can get on our app and find it. You really should watch it, because one of the things that he said was this: don't let the gap between where you are and where you want to be keeping you from taking a step. In other words, sometimes we get intimidated by where we would like to be or wish we were, and we don't do anything. He says, don't let that happen. And hopefully you took that to heart because he asked you to go back and examine these things where you need to take a step forward. And then Graham when he introduced this series, he said in the next 3 weeks, which start today, we're going to be addressing 3 topics specifically. These are important areas where we need to establish what we call margin. And so what I want to do before we jump in the talk is I actually want to give you a definition that I'm going to use for the next 2 weeks on what margin means. And here's the definition of margin. It is the space between your current status and the edge of your limits. So it's the space between where you are financially, where you are in your relationships, where you are in your time, your health. It's the space between you and your limits. And most of the times, especially financially, we live really close to the edge because we all have limits. We all have limits. And when we're flirting around with those limits, when we're living on the edge, it creates stress in our life. It creates havoc. It wreaks havoc on your relationships, your finances. It narrows your focus. And what we tend to do is to blame it on other things. But you cannot run at the edge of your limits and not expect a mishap. You can't run your motors at 10,000 RPMs and not expect something to happen. Now, if you are not a church person, it's very interesting because of today's topic. One of the things that God actually talks about margins, and especially when it comes to your time and your schedule, he talks about it in the Bible. I mean, you may not know this, but when God was taking Israel out of Egypt, they were slaves for hundreds of years in Egypt. When he brought them out of Egypt, he gave them some commandments, and we're all familiar, probably heard of the 10 Commandments. Might not be able to say what they are, but within the 10 Commandments is one commandment where God commands the people of Israel to take a day off every week. And the reason why is because he created us and he knows as human beings that we function better when we have some space between us and the edge. He knows that we function better when we rest. We function better when we leave work at work and we go home. So that's what we're going to be talking about a little bit today is margins and your time and your schedule. Now, before we get into it, you might think, I don't want to talk about this. I don't have a problem with this. Let me give you some signs that you might have a problem with it because we all have blind spots, and the thing about blind spots is you can't see them, but everybody else can. So somebody else might say, oh, you need to listen to this. But if you say things like, all the time you say things like, I'm going to be a few minutes late. I'm always late. Or I have to leave early. Or, I might miss the first 10 minutes of your game. If that's the way your schedule is, what time do you actually come on? Because I'm going to get there right when you come on. I'm going to watch your performance, and then I got to go, right? If you're always driving fast and speeding, I don't mean the normal 10 miles an hour over the speed limit, okay? I mean like 15, 20, you're getting tickets or getting pulled over because you're always late, so you're always driving fast. You eat in the car because you don't have time to stop and eat, or you're multitasking, which women are amazing at multitasking. They can drive, put on their makeup, and text at the same time, So if that's you, when you're at work and you're thinking, I need to be home, I need to be home, I need to be home, and the whole time you're at home, you're thinking what needs to be done at work, you might have a problem with your time management. Or maybe you're single. A lot of people think, probably if you're single, we got any single, where's all my single ladies? Oh, my single ladies. When you're single, people say to you, oh, it must be so nice to be single. You have so much time. And you go, no, it's not the case. In fact, maybe you don't know how to say no, so your schedule's filled up. So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how to solve this. And if you don't have this problem, we're going to talk about how to keep you from having this problem. Now, I could take a whole bunch of different approaches. We could talk about time management. We could look at a management system. Darlene and I were talking the other day. Anybody remember back in the old days, in the 90s, a thing called day timers? Anybody used to carry a day timer with you? You go, hey, let's get together for lunch. Well, let's pull out my day timer, which is like a trapper keeper. And, you got to find a date that you can do it. Day timers was actually, they had a whole seminar where they would teach you management systems, and then they try to sell you some stuff as well. And most of those times, those things maybe work for a season, but they might not fit our personality. There's a whole lot of things we could talk about. We could talk about calendars. We could give you nuts and bolts. We could talk about those things. We could tell you about apps. That frustrates me so much because every year it seems like our office introduces a new app for us to get on for time management. And I'm like, I'm 61. I just learned last year's app, and now I got to get another app? But there's always something else coming out about helping us schedule, helping us get better at scheduling. I'm not going to talk about that. I want to look at something different. I want to look at something that's really more of an idea. And it's an idea that can become a prayer that can turn into a lifestyle, a mindset. It can become like a war cry, a mantra. Because I believe, and this is why this is so important, I believe this one idea that I want to share with you today can change your life. And the reason why it can change your life, because it has to do with time. And in our culture, time is life, like Danny Rojas. Football is life. Time is life. Because as your schedule goes, there goes your time. And I believe that if we take this principle we're going to talk about today and we can incorporate it into our life, not only will it teach you how to manage your time, how to work your schedule, how to tell you what's important, but I believe can actually help you define your purpose in life. That's huge. And when you can define your purpose, you can then decide what is important for you to reach that purpose. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at a psalm that was written by Moses. Now, a lot of people, if you're a Bible person, when you think of Psalms, you don't think of Moses, you think of David, You know what's really interesting about Moses? The Bible says that he lived to 120 and he had perfect eyesight. Isn't that crazy? Has nothing to do with today's talk. I just think that that's really cool. Because when you're about 45 and you start doing this, you're like, no, my eyesight's perfect. I just need more light. And then now where I'm at, even more light doesn't help, right? So anyway, so this psalm is written by Moses, and Moses kind of had 4 lives. He lived, in that 120 years, he lived 4 lives. His first life was he was raised in Pharaoh's palace. So it's kind of like lifestyles of the rich and famous kids of Cairo Hills or something like that. So he grew up rich. He didn't need anything. But then the grace that he had with that family turned when he murdered an Egyptian. And because of that, he ended up running away and he became a shepherd. And if there's anything that shepherds have is time. Those days go slow sitting there watching sheep eat grass. What are we going to do today? I'm just going to watch. So if anything that he knew about was time. And at this point when he's a shepherd, he has no idea that he thinks that this is his life for the rest of his life. But God had other opportunities for him, and the third part of his life was going back to Egypt and confronting Pharaoh, the whole let my people go and the plagues and the river of blood, and where he became God's mouthpiece for the country of Israel and was responsible for really toppling the most powerful country in the world without even firing a shot. Their whole army is decimated. But then his fourth life, the last part of his life, was leading this country of Israel that had been slaves for 400 years, was leading them to God knows where, literally, because they wandered around the wilderness for 40 years. And they complained like it was nobody's business. I mean, God got so mad that he says to Moses at one point, you're going to lead them for the rest of your life because I'm not going to do it. And Moses is like, gee, thanks for the opportunity, right? Anyway, Moses gets to the end of his life, and God tells him, you're not going to go into the promised land. I'm going to take you and let you see it, which is probably why he had perfect eyesight, so that he could see what he's missing. I'm going to let you see all your life great eyesight, and so you can see what you're not going to get. Okay, anyway, so he takes him. And so if anybody had a perspective on time, it's Moses. And in Psalm 90, he gives us this perspective that he has on time. And I just want to say this because maybe you're watching online and maybe a lot of people start going to church or come back to the church for a long time. They're not sure about what they believe about God or even the Bible. Let me just tell you something about the Bible. You don't have to believe the Bible to read it. You know that, right? I mean, you don't read stuff that you believe. You don't only read things you believe. I mean, some of y'all read the National Enquirer or People magazine, and none of that's true. And yet you read it. You read things to discover if they are true. And the reason why I'm saying this is that what I'm trying to tell you is that you might not be a Christ follower, but this is a principle that we're going to talk about today. And if you go, oh, it's from the Bible, or, I'm not sure if I believe that stuff, you can miss out on a principle and an insight that is so astounding that can really change and reframe your thinking. So I'm going to read it to you. It's a little bit tricky. And then we get to the end. This last verse is like a punchline that is so powerful, that is so, these 6 little words that if we were to let them soak down into our life, and maybe even become a prayer, they can literally change your life and give you a new perspective and a new mindset. So we're going to start in Psalm chapter 90, verse 1. This is Moses talking, and he starts out by saying, Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. Before the mountains were born, you brought forth the world from everlasting to everlasting. In other words, God, you are everlasting to everlasting. You are from beginning, which we don't know where that is, to an end that has no end. And somewhere in the middle is us. He says in verse 3, you turn people back to dust, saying, return to dust, you mortals. I just picture God looking like Gandalf going, return to dust, you mortals. That's what he's doing, right? But here's what he's doing. It's Moses' way of saying, God, you control from beginning to end, from the beginning to end. You know everything that's going to happen. Now, that brings a question. Does God know how long we're going to live? I don't know. Good question, though. It's a question that people have debated for years. In fact, you may not believe it, but a lot of people, when they have given a report they have 6 months to live, suddenly start praying and believing that God has something to do with it. Anyway, it goes on. Verse 4. He says, 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night. So he says, God, 1,000 years must seem like a day to you. Or better yet, 1,000 years must seem like 3 or 4 hours, because that's what a watch is. If you've done watches like on sailboats, I've done those before. They're about 3 or 4 hours. So here's what Moses is saying. God, as I get older, the days just seem to fly by. I can't even imagine how time flies for you. I mean, you are from everlasting to everlasting. God, for you, if 1,000 years seems like 3 or 4 hours, what does my life look like? One place in the Psalm says a vapor. Like when you walked out this morning, it was cold, and you went, oh, that in light of eternity, that's what our life is. It's like a vapor. And he keeps going, verse 5, because we're getting up to the punchline here. Yet you sweep people away in the sleep of death. They are like new grass of the morning, and in the morning it springs up new, but by evening it's dry and withered. You gotta see the baby. When you see a baby and you're like, oh my gosh, she's so cute. She has her whole life ahead of us. But from God's perspective, from everlasting to everlasting, our entire life that we get so worked up about and we get so jacked up about, he says, it's like grass that springs up, new grass that springs up in the morning, but by the afternoon sun, it's gone. That's what our life is like. Aren't you glad you came to church today? Well, let's pray. We're going to go home. No, I'm just kidding. Verse 10, he says, our days may come to 70 years or 80 if our strength endures. Yet the best of them are trouble and sorrow, for they quickly pass and we fly away. Some of you have had trouble and sorrow in your life. I don't know, did you see about that? Did you guys read in the news about that Destin lady who won $1 million in the lottery? And then she went and bought a house and paid cash for it. Because by the time even though you win $1 million, you don't get $1 million, But she went and bought a house for cash, moved her stuff in, went to the supermarket, and while she was at the supermarket, she got a phone call from the fire department. Her house burned down. And she didn't have insurance yet, and she had no more cash. You think you've had a tough time. That is some sorrow right there. Moses would tell you, Moses would say, look, I know. I lived in luxury. Then I had to tend sheep for like 40 years, and then God makes me go back to Egypt, and I was all like, let my people go. And Pharaoh was all like, no way. And so then I had to lead them for another 40 years, and all I did was complain. And then we finally get to where we're going to cross the river to the promised land. God is like, you can't go in. I was all like, no way. So he says, we have trouble in this life, and then we fly away. In other words, we're out of here. Graham talked about this last week. He says, we are a spirit that has a soul that lives in a body. And your spirit, your soul is going to live forever somewhere. But this body, the time that you're in this body is like a vapor. You're going to have troubles in this world, and then boom, you're gone. Here's his point. Time and life pass quickly. And then verse 11 is one of my favorite verses. He says, if only we knew the power of your anger. You make me angry. If we only knew the power of your anger, this is what I love. Your wrath is as great as the fear that is your due. What? What is that besides a poorly crafted sentence, right? If I'd have wrote that sentence, I'd have got an F in English. Your wrath is as great as the fear that is your due. This is actually a very complicated Hebrew sentence to translate, that if you do it like pure translation straight to English, it doesn't make sense. So they did a good job of trying to kind of stay to the original context. But here's what I believe he's trying to say. Here's what he's saying. If we could see God as he is, we would give him the reverence that he's due. If we could see God as he is, we would give him the reverence that he's due, the respect that he's due. Here's what Moses is saying. God, you are from everlasting to everlasting. And our lives are right here in the middle, and they're like a vapor compared to yours. And if we could ever see our lives as you see it, when it comes to our time, when it comes to our lives, that we would give you more honor, the honor that you're due. Because I only have and you as well, I only have a very thin slice of time to do something. So wouldn't the right thing to do be to give him the glory that he's due? Because if my life in the scope of eternity is this long, then I want to make sure I have my priorities right and give the reverence that is due to you. Here's another way we could say this. If we could see how God sees us, it would change the way we see our time here. I need to make a little adjustment. It's getting my ethif. Here we go. That should be better. If we could see how God sees us, it would change the way we see our time here. If we saw God for who God really is, we would probably rethink what we do with this gift of this limited amount of time that we've been given. See, we don't think this way. We think in the context of our life. I mean, it's exactly that. Our life. That's how we think of it. This is my life. And Moses says, no, don't look at your life in the context of your life. Look at your life in the context of your life through the everlasting to everlasting. In other words, it's good to pause and contemplate the brevity of life, because when you do that, you will impact directly or indirectly what you decide to do with your time. When you decide to pause and say, I'm going to look at my life in the scope of eternity and I realize how much time I have, the limited amount of time I have, it will impact what you decide to do with your life, knowing that you want to be a good steward of that time. Now he comes to the application, and this is the 6 words that I believe that can just change the way you think. In verse 12, he says, teach us to number our days. Another way to say this is, teach us how to live as if our days were numbered. Remember an old country song that says, if I could ride a bull named Fu Manchu, 8 seconds. Remember that song? Because live like you're dying. That's basically what he's saying, is what if you taught us to live like our days were numbered? Because we live, especially when you're younger, like you're going to live forever. We live like we're always going to be young. I make this joke, when you get to be 40 and you think you still kind of in your mind think you're young, and then you pull your Hemi playing softball, right? And you're like, where'd that come from? And then you get to 50 and you start to realize that, in my 50s, I don't do that as much because I know I can hurt myself. Then when you get in your 60s, you get hurt getting out of bed, and you're like, what? You're limping, and someone goes, what happened? You go, I don't know. I just woke up this way, right? Anyway, I don't know what that is. But we live like we're going to live forever, and our bodies are going to live forever, and then we're always going to have our kids around, and we're always going to have our husband around, our wife around, our parents around. Moses says that's a mistake. Moses says, what if you learned to number your days? What if you lived like you had a limited amount of time? Now, here's the thing. We all do this in some areas of our life and don't even realize we're doing it. Like, ladies, when you got married, you numbered the days between when you said yes and when you said I do, right? You knew exactly how much, or the mom of the bride did it. You knew how many days that you had and all the things that you had to get done, and you numbered them down so that by the time you got married, they were all done, right? Some of you, anybody ever studied for an exam? When you have an exam, you do the same thing. You number your days. You know how many, some of you just numbered the night before, but you know how many days you have before the exam. If you've ever had a deadline at work, you know what it means to number your days. Moses says, what if you lived your whole life that way? Now, here's why this is important. This is what he says next. He says, teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart. Lord, teach us how to live like our days are numbered so that we can have the wisdom that you have on what to do with our days. That if we learn to live with our days, we learn to live as if our days are numbered, we get the heart of wisdom to know exactly what's important, what's going to be worth it, what I need to put in, what I need to take out. That when we live with this mindset, and I love the song we did by Coldplay, and one of my favorite lines in there is closing walls and ticking clocks. You know, that as you get older and the clock is ticking, this clock of limited time that you have is ticking, the walls begin to close in on what your options are. And Moses says if you would live with that mindset, you will have the wisdom to know what's important in your life and what you should be not putting into your life and what you should put into your life. So let me back up and kind of summarize this whole thing. Remembering that our time is limited provides us with the wisdom to know how to spend our limited time. Let me just say it a way that's shorter and probably you could walk out of here and remember this. Because my time is limited, I need to limit how I spend my time. Because my time is limited, I need to realize and I need to understand what I'm spending my time on. Because my time is limited, I need to know how to spend my time. Now, I want to kind of change gears here because I want to do you a favor. Before I do that, though, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Eric, speaking of time, how long is this going to take? Because Miami's about to play. It's Wild Card Sunday. You know, in fact, Miami, I think they've already started the game. Anybody know the score? Don't they start at 11? Anyway, Dolphins fans? Anybody Dolphins fans? Jaguar fans? What a game that was, huh? Somebody came up to me in the first service and said, I lost $20. I said, why? They go, we bet that you were going to talk about the Jaguars and you didn't. So now I'll make him even more mad and talk about him in the second service, and he could have won $20. So anyway, because, you know, anyway, so here's the fear. I want to do you a favor. Let me be the ghost of Christmas future. And I want to take you to the end of your life where people figure out what we're talking about, but oftentimes it's too late. In fact, in regards to this topic in time and schedule, the biggest blowback when it comes to this topic is the regret that comes at the end of your life, knowing that you spent your time on the wrong thing. So I want to help. What I want to do is let's fast forward to the end of your life and help you get that wisdom and then come back to where you are now, where that wisdom normally comes with regret. You can make changes so that when you look back, you don't live a life with regret. So before we go to the future, let's go back to the past. In 2012, 12 years ago, there was an article in the Huffington Post about this woman, Bronnie Ware, and she made her living taking care of terminally ill people. Okay, and so this article was about the top regrets of the dying because what she did was she started asking people questions. What was their biggest regret? Now, some of these people had weeks, months, maybe days to live. And she started asking them, what are your biggest regrets? And so what I want to do is I want to give you just the top two answers on the board. We're going to start with number 2. The second, and this one, you probably are guessing this one. And the second most common regret was, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. And this is what it said in the article. This came from every male person that I nursed. Think about this. Every man had this regret that I worked too hard. They missed their children's youth and their partner's companionship. Now, women also spoke of this regret, but as most were from an older generation, many of the female patients had not been breadwinners. All of the men I nursed deeply regretted spending so much of their lives on the treadmill of a work existence. You can thank me later. Do you know what this means? This means that if we don't learn to number our days, we will spend time on things that will become an avoidable regret later, things that aren't important that we end up regretting later because we think we have all the time in the world. We think that we're going to have plenty of time with our spouse. We think that we're going to have plenty of time with our children. But you don't, and you can't get it back. You can't get your 20s back. You can't get your 30s back. You might be 39 forever like Kristen, but you can't get your 40s back, okay? You'll only be 40s once. This is important because these men and women are now numbering their days. They know their time is limited. A doctor has said you have this much time to live. And now they're looking and they have the wisdom, and the wisdom that they found was, I wish that I hadn't spent so much time working. Pretty obvious. We probably guessed that one. I bet you didn't guess number one, though. Here's number one. I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself and not the life others expected of me. Look at what she said. This was the most common regret of all. When people realize that their life is almost over and look back clearly on it, it's easy to see how many dreams had gone unfulfilled. Many people had not honored even half of their dreams and had to die knowing that it was due to choices they had made or not made. I love this last line. Health brings a freedom very few realize it until they no longer have it. I just did you a favor. I just fast forwarded you to the end of your life. I wanted to do it differently. I tried to get the creative team. I wanted to not say a word about it. I just wanted to have this big robe and point a bony finger at a grave and have you go, no, ghost, no! But here's what's interesting. When people get to the end of their life, or you fast forward to the end of your life, you know what you find yourself doing? Looking back. When you get to the end of your life, that's what you find yourself doing, is looking back. Even at 61, that's what I find myself looking back. Now, nobody's going to bat 1,000. Nobody's going to get there and I have no regrets. There's always going to be something. I mean, I have some regrets. I wish I wouldn't have said that. I wish I wouldn't have focused on that. But I also have satisfaction in knowing that 40 years ago, I met this woman that I would never change my decision on that, you know? So that's when we get to go, because when you get to the end of your life, you end up looking at the beginning of your life. You look at, and what we want to do is what Moses wants to do and what God wants us to do is to be able to learn to number our days so that when we get to the end of our days, we can look back with satisfaction and not regret. And you now have the wisdom because I'm telling you right now what it's going to look like, and you now have the wisdom being at the end of your life what it's going to look like. Now you have to decide, what are you going to do with that wisdom? What are you going to do with that in regards to your current schedule, in regards to your pace, in regards to how you interact with your family, all of those things? What do I do with the wisdom that I have when I know that I have very limited space between me and my limits? What do I do with that? Because my time is limited, so I need to limit how I spend my time. Now, I know there's pushback, because whenever you talk about this, people are, Eric, you don't understand. You don't understand my life. You don't understand what's going on. I know there's pushback because I have the same pushbacks, because I'm a human being. The only difference between me and you is I have a microphone and I can speak publicly and you can't, okay? So here, let me give you some pushbacks. Here's some pushbacks I hear. Eric, if I don't do as much as I possibly can, I'll never make it. Make what? What do you mean you'll never make it? And speaking of it, what is it? Do you know what it is? I'm not sure. Well, do you know what these men and women would say who are on their deathbed, who have a limited amount of time, and they've numbered their days, and now they're looking back at the decisions they'd make? You know what they'd say? Make sure you're choosing the right it. You better know what it is. Many times we just automatically take it from our culture or from our neighbors or even our parents. Were they successful? Were they unsuccessful? Do I want to be like them? Do I not want to be like them? You better know what it is. God, teach us to number our days, that we might have the wisdom that comes from heaven to know what's important. Here's a second pushback. Eric, I can't do this because I can't slow down because I will be poor. I'll be poor. So basic. Inventing Anna. I'll be poor. Now, this is an issue. Listen, and for some of you, that's not an issue. Some of it is. In fact, for some of you that it's an issue, I just wonder if you've ever stopped to define what poor is. Because for some of you, it's a moving target. The more you get, the more you want. And the more you get, core kind of creeps up behind you, and you keep pushing for more and more and more and more. But then you get to the end of your life, and you have all this stuff that means nothing, and you realize you spent your time pursuing things that don't matter at the end. God, teach us to number our days. This is why it's such an amazing prayer, because you can pray this prayer every single day. Lord, teach us to number our days. Teach me today when I go out, teach me to number my days, that I may have your wisdom on what to say yes to, what I should focus on. Here's another one. I won't be accepted. By who? Who won't you be accepted by? We got any high school students here? I know we had a lock-in this week. We had some middle school students. I want to tell you, high school students, something that your parents have probably told you, but you don't listen to them because they're your parents, so maybe you'll listen to me. All those people at school that you think is important about what they think about you, in 10 years, you won't even know where they are. Maybe you will now because of social media and Facebook, but you'll probably just do a like. I don't know, maybe you'll unfriend them. I don't know, but all those people, because here's what happens. When you're younger, you let people, especially in high school or middle school, you let other people define what's important for you, and when you do that, you end up being ripped off of your most valuable commodity, time. Lord, teach us to number our days. Here's another one. Here's another book. I won't measure up. If I don't do this, Eric, I won't measure up. To who? The Joneses? To the people? I won't measure up. To what? You know, when you get into the stage of life where you begin to lose your health and there's no options, you might get there and realize you spent your time chasing something that you never ever defined. Now, if you're a Christ follower, you call yourself you love Jesus or you love the church, you call yourself a Christ follower, I just want to tell you, God has a plan for you. God has a plan for He has something for your family that's incredible, that's above what you could ever ask, dream, or imagine. And you can miss it if you continue to let people determine what's important to you. And how do they do that? Because your schedule gets filled up, it's out of control, you don't have time for anything, and then it's because people say what's important for you. And God says, no, learn to number your days. Learn to live as if your days are numbered so that you're gonna gain a heart of wisdom. So I told you, I'm not giving you nuts and bolts, I'm giving you this idea. So, because I believe that this idea is so simple that you can pray this and it can become a lifestyle. And here's what happens when you get up every morning and go, God, teach me to number my days. Teach me to number my days. Teach me to number my days. You will be presented with an opportunity that day for saying yes to something or no to something. And if this is in your mind, you'll think, okay, is this part of God's plan for my life? So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna put some questions on the board, on the screen. They're on your app if you go to our Shoreline Notes, and you can take a picture of the screen, and I want you to talk about this. I want you to do two things. I want you to ask these questions to yourself, and then I want you to talk about them with someone you love, your spouse or a friend, or go to your community groups, or go to sisterhood, or with men. We have Man Cave Monday that meets at 6 o'clock out here on the deck. And if it's cold, we have a fire. I have men that meet on Tuesday mornings at 7 a.m. at local market. We have breakfast and we read the Bible and pray and go, hey, look, this is, ask these questions to them. Ask them not only to yourself, but to people who know you. And here's the first one. What do I need to add to my schedule? And what do I need to subtract from my schedule? What do I need to add to my schedule? Some of you, it might be, I need to add prayer. I need to add spending time with God. Some of you might be, I need to subtract certain people. Maybe there's people in your life that when you're around them, they take you in the direction, knowing that you have a limited amount of time, they take you out of what's important. Maybe they've been stealing away time from your life. Maybe they're determining what's important for your life. Maybe it's a person that you need to live. Maybe it's a group of people. But what do I need to add to my schedule, and what do I need to subtract from my schedule? And then second one is, what do I need to do more of? What do I need to do less of? This is going to be tough for some of you. Some of you, what do I need to do more of? Now, you don't have to get rid of it completely, okay? Maybe it's less TV. Maybe it's less news. My wife had the news on all day the other day. And I'm like, what are you going to do next? Start watching Andy Griffith and what is it, Game Show Network? When my father was dying, that's all he watched was Fox News, Andy Griffith, and the Game Show Network. I'm like, are you going to bed at 7:30 now? Anyway, So what do you need to do less of? Maybe it's spend less time on Facebook or social media. Whatever it is, less time doing something that may be good, but it's not as valuable. You know, I had to do this. Before our children were born, I used to run triathlons back before it was cool, back in the 90s. In fact, I started in 89 was when I started doing triathlons. And I actually was pretty fast. I was in the top 10 in the state of Florida. If I went to a triathlon in Florida, I could finish in the top 10 overall. But then we started having kids. And when my oldest was about 6 or 7, and my middle one was about 3 or 4, and the youngest one was around 2, 1.5, I couldn't keep up that schedule. I mean, I was training 20 hours a week, and I just couldn't do it. And I had to decide that for this season in life, what was more important for me? Get to the end of my life and I'm completely fit? Well, you see I didn't choose that. I chose my kids. I chose my family. I chose ministry, actually. I think I chose right. You know, again, we're all going to have some kind of regrets, but you can limit the regrets that you have if we live our lives as if they are numbered. And when we do that, we get the wisdom, just not from people, but from God himself. If we just learn to live our lives as if they're numbered. Imagine waking up every single day, whether you're 17 or 70. Because I guarantee you when you're 70, you're starting to figure that, you know, there comes a point in your life when you have more days behind you than you know you have in front of you. And you start living that way. What if you started living that way early on? What if you started living your life and waking up every single day and say, Lord, teach me to number my days. Teach me to number my days. That I might have a heart of wisdom to know what is the right thing to do. I'm telling you what, it would change your mindset. That's why you can take all those seminars and how to schedule and learn block timing and all of those things. But if we went through life with this mindset of, Lord, teach me that my days are limited so that I have the wisdom and know what to do with those days, this perception would trickle down into every area of your life. And I know this because when you live like your days are numbered, you're going to be given a heart of wisdom so that you know you can keep yourself from living on the edge. Next week, we're going to talk about your finances, and I believe that is the number one area in our culture where people live on the edge. And there's no way to live on the edge financially and not have some kind of mishap, because life works that way. Father, thank you so much for your word. Lord, I thank you so much. I thank you that you care for us so much that you sent your son Jesus to die on our behalf so that we could have eternal life, that we could live forever with you. But even more than that, you gave us your word so that we can make best use of this limited, because we're going to live forever, but we have a limited amount of time here. God, we want to live with the wisdom that comes from knowing that our days are numbered. And in that wisdom, that we would know exactly what we need to do with our lives, what's important, what's not important, so that when we get to the end of our life, we can look back with satisfaction. Like, I didn't say this in the first service, but we can look back with satisfaction, unlike, instead of living, I did it your way. Who's that guy? Yeah, Frank Sinatra. Instead of saying, I did it my way. Yes, I can put jokes in the middle of a prayer. Thank you very much. That's what I do. So next week, like I said, I'm going to bring back part 3 of Living on the Edge. That wasn't a very good prayer, was it? Lord, thank you for giving us the wisdom that comes from you so that as we number our days, God, we know exactly what you've called us to do. We know you have a plan for us and our family. And Lord, we do not want to get to the end of our days with regret. We want to get there with satisfaction that we did it your way. We love you and praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless you guys. Here's Molly.